Ahmed, welcome to the show, man. You have an experience of over years, a SANS Institute instructor, founder of Cyber Dojo. To start, could you share a bit about your journey into security as a beginning? And then what led you into being an instructor? And also, how did you get into Gen AI and LLM application security?
Hey, good morning to both of you, Rabea and Ryan. Thank you for having me. Wow, such a loaded question, man. So, starting with security, I started my interest in security when I was in high school, right? Just starting learning, typical programming things, Visual Basic, and later on C. And one thing led to the other. I always knew that I wanted to be in security for no particular reason other than watching The Matrix, I guess. But and the movie Hackers back then, that kind of gives up my age. But yeah, right after college, I pursued specific cybersecurity jobs throughout the career. So I've been doing like different things, right? Started with traditional security with firewalls and application firewalls and all of these network heavy devices, which led me to learn more about networking and how different devices connect with each other with each other. As you can guess, this is a very technical job, right? And then from there, fast forward, cloud came out, and then cloud became a prominent field. And with new technology, you always have new security issues that you might face. So I moved into the cloud, and I also, again, had to learn cloud as well. And now we have AI, right? So it all ties into the story, and we'll circle back on that. As for the SANS type of work, I took my first SANS class back in 2012, 2013, something like that. And then since then, I was like, I think this is like the best cybersecurity training I've ever taken. Like, hands down, there's no comparison. So I always wanted to become an instructor. But then 2019, I took a cloud security class. And that's when I took it actually in San Francisco, where I live right now, which is very ironic in a good way. And then that's how I got introduced to the SANS folks. And that's how the journey with SANS started about like 5, 6 years ago now.
Well, that is pretty awesome. Right now, going from working with the hardware side of things and firewalls and then evolving into cloud, I'm sure there was challenges, especially with enterprises, like whether it's on the digital transformation side, but all the security concerns that comes with it. Do you, from your experience working with enterprises, do you think security, let's say 10 years ago, was mainly an afterthought, especially with like companies like Cloud Journey?
So I can actually go back more than 10 years ago, right? So let's say 20 or 25 years ago, security was definitely an afterthought. And we see that with every type of protocol that is being created, every type of new technology. People wanted to ship things that works, and then that's it. They would worry about security later on. That has gradually changed as security became, well, as we start to see major security incidents and issues, and companies started to lose money essentially because of security risks that are being exploited. And then over the past, I don't know, let's say 15 to 10 years, people started to take security more seriously. And something also happened over the past 10 to 15 years is the fact that the states started to pay attention to the cybersecurity issue. So on the governments worldwide, now they're investing more, encouraging organizations more. And now it became something that the average person knows about. Everyone knows what cybersecurity is now, right? That wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago. That was the major difference.
You mentioned security is growing. So you said before people didn't really consider cybersecurity as its own discipline, maybe going back, many years. And now it's growing as a discipline where it's pretty much a priority in enterprise. Like, and most enterprises, serious enterprises, have cybersecurity as a top priority. On the other hand, you have engineering teams and data analytics teams with a lot of pressure to move fast. So you have sort of different philosophies of move fast and break stuff. And then you have the agile, which is sort of a formal structured version of move fast and break stuff. So in an enterprise, you have the growing prioritization of cybersecurity as a really rigorous discipline, and pressure on your engineering and your business units are the ones trying to drive outcomes for business units to move fast. This every time, almost always, every case. I've never seen a case where it's not tension between the engineering and the data and those drivers with the cybersecurity team. So what are some of your thoughts on that tension and as it's grown through the years, and maybe how to mitigate it, or maybe some thoughts on how to work through this? And between engineering and data and cyber?
So that tension is definitely real, right? And it is real because of the definition and the goals and the KPIs of each team. And if I am to blame someone, I would blame us, the cybersecurity community. And the reason for that is because if you think about what security is, what cybersecurity is, you have a technology, often a new type of technology. Our job is to understand that technology and understand why is it being useful, and then try to understand what are the security issues that could appear, risks, etc., and how to protect it. So the main goal is to enable the technology rather than stopping it. And for many years previously, we, the security people, thought about ourselves as being the cops who basically are going to tell you to stop. And that will break things. And that was an issue historically, right? Since the beginning of technology. Well, maybe not technology, but like at least like IT type of technology. But then it became very obvious when we made the shift to the cloud. As we moved to the cloud, we started to think, hey, we need to ship things fast. We introduced concepts such as DevOps, and the whole idea of DevOps is to automate and ship things fast, right? And now on the security side, we face the dilemma. The engineers are shipping things fast, and our job is to stop them. Well, that's how we used to think about it, right? And that obviously did not work. And the reason why it didn't work is because if we both go to the CEO of the company and we say, the security side is going to say, stop this process, and the engineers are going to say, we want to move fast because we want to make money. And then the CEO is always going to side with the engineering side. And the result of that is going to ship insecure products. Security teams are going to be sidelined. The solution is actually very simple. As always, if you go back to the definition of what cybersecurity is, which is understand the technology, and in this case, understand the process, DevOps as an example, understand the need for shipping things fast, and then instead of stopping or pausing the development to apply security controls, really all you have to do is to inject your security inside these deployment pipelines. That's where the term DevSecOps came from, right? So Sec is in between Dev and Ops. Example of that is that if you're shipping code and your code is being deployed, you can easily scan that code for security vulnerabilities before you ship it. So you're not really stopping the process unless there is a serious security vulnerability. So now it became more systematic. So again, back to the basics, right? Understand the technology and figure out the best way to achieve the goals in a secure manner.
So there's many innovations around the security technology, specifically cybersecurity technology, that's helped automate some of these processes. And then what I've also noticed, probably Rabea, you've noticed too, or anyone that's been developing for years, like you said, going back into the days of watching Hacker, is that you didn't think a lot about the security component of what you were delivering as a developer. Maybe some did. But then over the years, as cybersecurity grew as a discipline and it became more of a structured almost a science, engineers got better at preventing their code and what they're delivering to have the exploits. So in other words, engineers got better at coding in more secure code bases. So, and that took time. So the question would be then, how much of the responsibility, maybe this is an engineering question, but your senior engineer, how much of the responsibility is on them to preemptively understand how to not deploy the insecure code, which then causes problems for the cybersecurity team? And do you see that changing at all? Do you see the engineering getting better at the code bases becoming more secure and more thoughtful and how they're designing their solutions with cybersecurity in mind?
We absolutely see that engineers are becoming way better at writing secure code. And there are many reasons for that. I'll get to that in a second. But your first question is, if you have the engineering team, whose responsibility is it to produce secure application? That was essentially the question. And in cybersecurity, we have a saying that we say security is everyone's job. The security team in an organization, their job is to make sure that there are security controls, sufficient security controls applied everywhere. We call this defense in depth. So at every layer you create some sort of a security control. Scanning code, so static code scanning is one example of that. I don't think about engineering job as to secure their code. However, there's another way to think about it. What you can say is that if you write insecure code that gets detected further down in the pipeline, that is more work on you, because that pipeline is going to flag it and it's going to return back to you and it's going to delay your job, right? So it's going to directly affect your KPIs. And that's an incentive for engineers to write secure code from the beginning. So that's reason number one why security engineers are getting better. There are other reasons as well. So all of these tools that we are developing, right, and we're injecting them into the pipeline, these tools are also available for the engineers at the IDE level. So you see many engineers right now writing code, whether that's like infrastructure as code or actual, I don't know, Python or like Node code. And the IDE is going to flag certain security issues, and they will see it. So if you are a junior engineer, right, and you see this, and like, I don't know what this SQL injection is, you can easily look it up super quickly because it is flagged right there. Now we have AI as well, and it multiplies that by a number of times, right? Because not only it will flag it, but it can fix it for you. Your co-pilot's going to write code and it's going to tell you, hey, like this code might not be secure enough. You can actually ask it, hey, is there any issues? And obviously, doesn't mean that you're going to ship 100% security. But again, remember the basics, defense in depth. Shift left, but not just for production or for the speed of production, but also for security as well.
I was just wanted to know that exactly. It's the shift left mentality. How soon can you catch issues? And security is part of the things that you can catch in DevSecOps pipelines. Actually, had a question about like a point you mentioned, Ahmed, which is talking about CEOs, owners of companies, product managers, anybody that's saying like ship it and ship it right now. I believe any sector where there has to be more need for showing the importance of it, just like how cybersecurity was 15 years ago and evolved into people understanding it more. And AI is the same thing. Anybody who's working in such a field needs to be, other than an implementer or someone who understands this sector, to be an educator, because it's tough to just sell someone on a technology or a concept in technology without telling them, is there a fear factor or a risk factor? Is there a productivity factor? So my question is, while I know you already brought up that CEOs are going to prefer the productivity side more than the security, but I think that's also changing. Like a lot of executives are understanding the risk of cybersecurity. Yes, I can push that feature, but if it opens doors for me to get a ransomware that's going to close my whole business for a week or whatever, or forever, God forbid, then I might just back off a little bit. So I guess to round my question up, how much do you think CISOs are running the show by fear?
That's a good one. I don't think about it as fear, but rather as risk management, right? Because that's what you do. You have a new product. The reason why you want a new feature is because you want to, it's a competitive advantage, right? And if there is a high risk, that could kill your competitive advantage. So if you think logically about it without any emotions, right? So no fear, that's what you should do. You should make sure that you have a decent amount of security with every step you take, because you're managing these risks, just like you're managing the risk of having another competitor who's shipping things faster than you are, right? So,
Makes sense.
and I think many executives understand this very, very well, because that's essentially a big part of what they do. Previously, let's say, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more even, people used to use fear. When someone comes and wants to sell you a security product, they would say, if you do not buy our product, bad things are going to happen. I guess that works to some level, right? But me personally, I prefer to use the logical way of saying this. Hey, this is a risk. Just like it feels more like insurance at this point.
And I think that sets up perfectly the executive questions. So we always ask the executive questions about the particular C-suite roles and what might be the vision around the role and where the roadmap would be around the role. So in this case, CISO. We talked about what the role might be in the future of technology officers, information officers, and sort of how they evolve. Because we know some of these roles, many of them didn't exist. If you go back many decades, there was no chief data officer. So the role of CISO seems to me evolving into a more and more powerful role on the board. Like, it doesn't seem to be going the opposite direction. It seems to be becoming more and more prevalent, more and more powerful, and even getting into the strategic business objective conversations, which it should be. So how do you see the role of CISO 1 year, 2 year, maybe 3 year, 5 years down the road? As an example, does it absorb CIO? So in other words, infrastructure. Does infrastructure, that person that's essentially running the information ops, do they absorb the CISO role? In other words, does this person have to become a cybersecurity expert too? In other words, CIO absorbs CISO, or is it CIO and CISO, or does it go the other way, where maybe your CISO becomes your CIO and your CISO becomes the same thing? Like your head of security is also your head of infrastructure, and you need to be an expert in both. Like, how would you see the CISO role evolving?
So the head of infrastructure and the head of security historically used to be the same person. It used to be the case that if you are the even CTO, right, you would be responsible for the infrastructure, and that included security. That was the case for many years, right? Because it kind of makes sense, right? You are the CEO of the company and you say, hey, this is a technology problem. Like security is a technology problem. Because we used to tie security to things like networks and firewalls. The beginning of the conversation, right? Very technical way of thinking about this. Soon enough, we realized that that's probably not the right approach. And that's what led us to create things like CISO. And now we started to separate the infrastructure from the security. And even within security, there are different levels, right? There is the governance type of security. There is the compliance type of security. And then there are like the technical security folks who are going to implement the controls, the actual controls. I don't see, to be perfectly honest, these roles merging or becoming under one umbrella. There's a direct conflict of interest to some extent. We started the conversation by asking, hey, like the dev team is doing something, and then the security are stopping them. You need these two people to be separate, at least the way we understand security at this point. Now, how are these roles going to evolve more? I think what's going to change is that both of these roles, so like anyone who leads the infrastructure or the application, and anyone who leads security or a subset of the security teams, will both need to learn a little bit more AI, maybe a lot more AI. That's the change, the immediate change that I see happening. And for obvious reasons, but we will dig into the details of this in a minute.
So they started out the same person originally. In other words, it's like the many hats type of a thing. And then as cybersecurity became more of a rigorous discipline, it clearly needed specialization, and it branches off into its own discipline. And yeah, go ahead.
And also, Ryan, you mentioned something else. You mentioned that the security representative or the security leader, CISO, for example, director, became more powerful. And we see that because the board of different organizations often is asking about security. So the CEO would often need to bring this leader to talk about security issues in front of the board. More power to that person. And the reason for that is because the board's job is to guarantee financial gains for the shareholders in a public company, for example, right? And one of the things that they care about, do we have any risks? Is someone going to hack us and destroy all of the processes we have built?
Exactly. So that the elevation, the CISO role goes from we're the security team embedded within the technical team, and the board doesn't really see me, to now they should be. It shouldn't be, oh, we need to go, we have a question, let's go find our security leader. The security leader should already be there on the board in the conversation with the CFO in terms of risk. In other words, risk modeling that the CFOs would be doing would be integrated with your security risk. It should be part of the model. So the CISO should be on the board. It shouldn't be, oh, we'll go find the security person, we need to ask them a question. They should be sitting at the table. And that's a significant elevation of the security role I've seen accelerating over the past several years, maybe the past 4 or 5 years, which I think is a good trajectory. And I think most serious companies are on this trajectory if they're not already there.
I have a little spin-off on this question, but you can see that the trajectory of how a CISO or that position evolved. Mostly the path is straight from infrastructure side. Most people are mainly built on firewalls, infrastructure, understanding the cloud on foundational level. And then not to say like that's the only path, but that's the most common path, that this will be your CIO and maybe your CISO if they are more focused on the security side. So my question right now, since you see how things are evolving in many paths. One is you have a lot of SaaS for the last 10 years. So there's a lot of services out there. Cloud is becoming more serverless. We're not saying like your own infrastructure is going to disappear, but definitely there is a heavy bet on, I just want to run this application whenever I need it. I don't need to run a whole shop just to run certain applications. So serverless definitely is taking a share. But at the same time, now with AI, you are evolving into another space. Like the other day, I was watching a presentation about like Tesla's code base, and they're saying how at some point when they introduced the self-driving software, at the beginning it was 90% code, like actually Rust or C written by engineers, and 10% are run by neural networks. And then as they evolved, there was like a version 2 of this, where now you have 60% of the code and 40% that was removed by neural networks. Right now, AI is taking over that functionality because it's already got trained, already learned, so that code is not useful anymore. So how much, I guess I'm going to ask two questions. How much do you think it's important that the CISO's path should be coming from engineering on the software side more than the infrastructure side as we move forward in the future? The second, how much you need to learn more about the AI side of things right now as we evolve throughout the years?
From a security perspective or from an
From
engineering
security perspective.
Everything. All right. So let's talk about AI. From a security perspective, there are three different things to think about when it comes to AI. The first thing is, well, my organization, people are going to create things with AI, and I need to understand how to secure them, how to make sure that if there are any security risks, I need to be on top of that, right? So that's the secure use of AI. And that could be very, very technical in the sense that someone is building an AI-based application, or it could be as simple as someone using ChatGPT for their work, sharing information with OpenAI, as an example, right? So there is that aspect of it. And then the second aspect is, can I use AI to enhance my processes, make them more efficient, faster, etc.? So that is using AI for security. What can I automate with AI? What are the tasks that are very difficult right now and consume a lot of resources where I can automate? And then the third is, how are attackers using AI? So in other words, are attackers being faster? Is it easier for people to attack me, right? Because if you think you want to protect an organization, you would look at your vulnerabilities, right? What are the things, the weaknesses that you have, and how easy is it for someone to exploit these vulnerabilities? That's the attacker side. So these are the three things that we should be thinking about from a security perspective. So back to the questions, what is it that we want to learn? And again, back to the basics. You want to learn how this new technology works, just like any other technology. When cloud was introduced, we had to learn cloud first. You have to learn how AI works. And the more you learn, well, the more technical your job is, the more you need to learn. And it will get to a point where we need to be really, really good at AI. Right now, it's enough for us to know maybe like some orphan manuals, just to know like the basic concepts, but that's changing very fast. So that's the key. Understanding as a leader what AI is, and also making sure that everyone underneath you can also use AI, understand the risks, etc.
So my follow-up to that would be sort of a simple, well, it's really not, maybe not simple, but like in the current state, you mentioned.
It's a trap.
No, he laid out the perfect sort of paths here, the perfect two components, which is the opportunities of how AI can be used to help security teams in their processes, but also then the vulnerabilities that it opens up. So on the vulnerability side, we have like what you mentioned, internal actors sharing things that they shouldn't be sharing. It's very easy to share things. Shadow IT has always been a problem, or somebody might have their own personal account and they're using it for work and it's not approved and nobody knows their own Gmail account and they upload emails and they're doing something, and then they leave the company and then they have some other their personal account. They've uploaded 2 million customer emails to the shadow and they left the company, and so this is always a problem, and it's difficult to defend against. In the Gen AI case, you have maybe even easier because you don't need necessarily your own account. You can, with a Gmail, you can go right to Gemini and be like, hey, I kind of need some insights. Let me dump my entire year's financials of the company and ask. And you can do this in 2 seconds, and you can get some answer. So this is the internal actor problems, but then the external actors, I think that's what you guys call it, like the external, like your hacker, people trying to get into your systems. Now they have AI that can maybe they're not good coders and it's difficult to create good malware. Maybe the AI can now help create better malware. So now you have maybe your distribution of the set of potential harmful hackers or people able to produce exploits is growing. And now my question is this: is the growth of the potential bad actors, because the AI tools can help them build exploits that they wouldn't normally have been able to do, is that outpacing AI's opportunities internally to help improve and defend? Is it sort of balanced, or is it tipping which way or the other way?
That's a great question, actually. And it's really very timely for you to ask that. So let me share a few things. So last month, so in August 2025, Anthropic created a report called the Threat Intelligence Report for August 2025. In that report, they create study cases, they write about study cases, and they show how people are using Anthropic to create malicious or to misuse the AI, including things like creating malware and having hackers to automate the entire process. If you go through that report, I actually have it in front of me. It's a 25-page report, so not that long. But it talks about cases that are very, very scary. So for example, the first one, the title is vibe hacking. So we have vibe coding, right? But now we have a new concept called vibe hacking, which is exactly what you described. A cyber criminal who doesn't necessarily have to have all the technical expertise to create malware can now vibe hacking their way into creating malwares, sending emails, following up. If you think about a hacking operation, it's a very technical challenge, and it might require multiple people with different expertise to achieve. But now you have AI. So that makes it much easier. The report itself goes to give many, many other examples, including state actors and different types of attacks that they run. I would encourage people to look into that. Maybe we'll have a link somewhere. But then back to your question, is this outpacing the defender side? This has always been an issue, right? Hackers do not have structures and they do not have bureaucracy, and it's enough for them to do it right once, where we have to be right all the time. Does that make sense? On our side,
That's very fair.
on our side of the house, if we are to defend against this, we have to have either to write certain tools ourselves, like me, and I am the CTO of an organization, and I'm going to direct my people to write like their own tools, or I need vendors to create that for me. Vendors will take time. Right now, we're seeing so many startups. If you look at the startups that are trying to automate SOC type of work, so detecting alerts and then responding to them using AI, you will find some 30 plus at least at this moment, right? And all of them are trying to do more or less similar things. We're going to use AI to detect, investigate, run threat hunting, and so on and so forth. So I have a feeling that, and there is no data backing this up, but there are some really smart hackers out there that are outperforming us. The vast majority is still a little bit behind, so we do have a chance. On our side, we need to support these organizations that are building these tools so that they build them fast.
One quick one, and it's not really a question. It's sort of like often described as like the chasing bear sort of analogy. Like I don't have to, like the three of us are in the woods and a bear comes. I don't need to outrun the bear. I need to just outrun Rabea.
I don't know about that, because you know what?
Makes sense. You just don't want to be the last one, right?
This often sort of turned into like a security analogy where it's like you said, like you have to be right 100% of the time. They just need to be right once, and they're always trying and they're always probing and they're always just, bots are running and systems are running looking for exploits in all different kinds of companies. So is it the case that there's sort of a base level of security that an enterprise needs, and then if they fall below that, they're probably very vulnerable to sort of all these consistent probing attacks and exploit attacks, and then the vibe hacking, like you mentioned, does the vibe hacking push some companies or push more companies under the threshold, like more of a higher risk threshold, because you can simply, more people and more systems are now able to like spin up and probe. And
Yes, absolutely. A few points on the bear analysis, right?
Yeah.
Few caveats. So if you are an important organization, so let's say you're a bank, for example, you're a very attractive target, you probably need to put some resources because you are going to be one of the first organizations to be targeted. Same thing if you are a government organization, right? And there are state actors who are possibly are going to go after you because the same thing. State actors usually have a lot of resources, and those are the ones who are going to use technologies. As a matter of fact, inside that report, I think I'm looking at it. I think there are maybe 40% of the attacks were state actors. There is a significant presence in there. So you will see, because these people are incentivized, so that's their job, that's their full-time job. How do I become very effective? So you have these two, right? If you are one of the top targets, you probably need to spend some resources, a little bit more than others. The line that you mentioned, that's what we call compliance, right? So you have to be compliant, and that will give you like the bare minimum of security standard that you have. And yes, I think you're right. I think that compliance line just kind of fell through now. We need to raise it rapidly to match the speed
Right.
of what attackers are doing.
Right. So I guess the way you framed it is more precise to say, depending on the business entity you are, you're already going to have most of the guns pointed at you. The hacktivists or the people that have motivations to attack you, which is either monetary, so you're going after the financial institutions, or where they think they can get some type of compensation, or state actors, or maybe it's political based, where you're hacking for the sort of your political belief system. And then the other companies that are just sort of your mom and pop, your average, you're a $1 billion company. You're not a controversial company. You don't have strong politics. You're out there. You're not associated with the big money banks. It's not that you might be so secure. It just might be the resources aren't pointed at you in a high degree. But now with Vibe hacking or with AI, if now there could be more resources generally available to the world, companies that might not have been looked at simply because it didn't make sense to use the resources to point at them, now you can spin up the resources quicker. So like you said, now everybody may be more vulnerable because there's just simply more exploits out there.
Yeah, you might attract hobbyists that can come and hack you instead of like an
Because it's
experienced hacker.
easier to do this now, so you're not the compliance line that you might be sort of protected from. I mean, so let's say you have your security compliance in place. So your security compliance is in place. In addition to, you're not a high value target, but now it doesn't matter if you're high value or not, because it's so easy possibly to just try. Like, let's just try. And now that you're able with the generative AI is going to allow access to more of these external actors, your average company is less safe, I would say. That's what I'm theorizing in my question.
Absolutely. It makes perfect sense. Not only that, but also now you're as a small shop, you're probably relying on some sort of a new technology. So maybe that was cloud, or now it's AI. And with that, there are new vulnerabilities that you didn't even think about. Like a very simple example, think about how many big and small companies suffered from publicly accessible S3 buckets, right? Because we didn't know. We just like create this thing, and it just it's out there, and we put data in, and it works. So you can use it for restaurant menus, but you can also put some financial data in there, and it's the same thing with AI now. So you mentioned earlier the SaaS companies. So for the mom and mom shops, these smaller organizations, that's where they need good SaaS companies that have good security practices, because that will multiply the effect of security risks, security vulnerabilities on them, because they don't have the big team to protect them, right? You're absolutely correct.
It's funny that you mentioned the public S3 one, because the latest one is the public ChatGPT chats that are shared between people. If you guys saw it, you can actually Google public chats that was shared between people, and it's indexed through Google. So that was like a scary one. People using personal accounts and using their work data and conversating with it. I wanted to ask you now, well, I have two. One is not on the technical side, more going back to the CISO. Now that person has a lot of responsibilities on their heads, and their department too, and their win, or their KPI for winning, is, of course, the company not to be hacked. But that's a huge responsibility, because things happen. And if it happens, who gets the whole responsibility, and how do you distribute such a responsibility? It's more of, I think, a more opinion based more than anything, but how do you distribute it if something hits the fan?
So the CISO's jobs, the reason why we have a CISO is because this individual is the leader of the security for the organization. It doesn't mean that this person or his group is responsible for everything security, but they are responsible for making sure that other members are doing security practice. So for example, if you take engineering, the CISO's job is to make sure that engineers have some level of DevOps implemented in there, right? On the high level, the engineers are going to be responsible for implementing that on the technical side, but the strategy and the defenses that we are going to lay out, that's the CISO's responsibility. The challenge is we have more attacks now, which means this individual is going to need to learn a little bit more, and his team also needs to learn a little bit more as well on the AI side. Now, I started my conversation with saying, like, yes, there are many security issues that come as part of using a new technology, in this case AI, but AI is also great because it gives us the opportunity. Think about any executive role. Does it make sense that now you can do things faster because you can search for information easier, because you don't spend a lot of time drafting emails? So you can actually, your work can be much more productive. Things that summarizes your meetings. So that allows you to spend more time on other things. Things such as learning about AI, adding or making sure that you have more controls on the AI side. So yes, there are more security issues that are going to come up and vulnerabilities and risks. But then at the same time, your productivity is also increasing because of the use of AI. So it's the same thing. It's just like the trajectory is a little bit more steep now. There's like more work to do.
And I have a specific question about a specific tactic that a hacker might use. I mean, we all heard the deep fake, that it's sort of like hits pop culture. It's interesting. You can fake a person's voice, and it's very easy to do with the transformer systems and the multimodal models. It's fairly straightforward to do. It doesn't require any skill to do something like this. So do you think this was an overblown fear? Because this was sort of one of the first sort of vulnerabilities or exploits sort of caught everyone by storm, because it's interesting. It's not a super technical exploit where we're talking about specific open ports and types of malware design patterns. We're talking about, I can create a video that looks like Rabea, and then I can start calling Rabea's banks with Rabea's voice and his information or whatever. And this is interesting. So a lot of people caught the attention of a lot of people because it's an interesting use case. So do you think, how are you seeing this playing out? So in other words, this was like 2 years ago, the deepfakes are going to take over. Everyone's going to get scammed, and it's going to be big problems. Do you think it was overblown, or do you think it was sort of like right on the money? Like, how do you see like the sort of deepfake concept now playing out in practice in the real world?
I think it's a very, very serious issue, and it's definitely not blown out of proportions. It's an issue that we should really take seriously. I'll give you an example. There were reports about state actors creating deep fakes and using that to interview with companies and then get jobs and then leak information. And because we have AI, they can communicate with everyone, right, over like Zoom, whatever. And they can create video and audio. They can send emails. They can even do the technical work that is required without even speaking the language of the target country, right? So that's a huge problem.
That's a scary social engineering experience.
That's not fictional. That's actually one of the case studies that was in that same report from Anthropic. This is actually what happened. So this is one thing, like that's a very serious state actor level. But also the example you mentioned, Ryan, like someone calling the bank and saying, hey, I am Rabea, and I need to withdraw, like whatever, right? I think what's going to change is the fundamental way we use authentication and authorization. In other words, our countermeasures used to be designed to kind of be able to tell humans from non-humans. That is changing rapidly. The simplest example is that CAPTCHA. Do you think the CAPTCHA works anymore? No, doesn't, right? Any basic AI is going to bypass that. So that's what we need to figure out as a cybersecurity industry on how are we going to change that. There is another complication. And that complication is that the way we interact with computers is also going to change. If you think about the interface of a computer, that was designed more or less for humans. So the keyboard you use, the mouse, it was designed because of some technical limitations. We didn't have screens. We had basically screens without graphics first. We had to create keyboards. And then we added graphics. So we had to add the mouse and then the cursor and so on, right? And we had to train on using that, the humans. We had to train, like if you take someone who never used a computer before, they would find this very, very difficult to work with. This is changing to become more natural for humans to work, meaning you will be talking to your computer. The computer is going to create visuals for you. As this changes, also the way we authenticate to our banks and so on will change as well. So in the future, it's not very strange to imagine that there will be some sort of authentication based on your bios, right? Biometrics, and based on the way you speak. And then this is where the problem becomes even more, because we will be using more technology to authenticate to the bank, etc. So there has to be some way of distinguishing what is actually AI and what's actually a human being. We don't have perfect solutions yet, but that is a discussion that's actually happening right now.
So this is one of the tactics. So the deepfakes is one of the powerful tactics that's in the set of expanded access and vulnerability creation. It's allowing more and more people to become bad actors, which then puts more and more companies at risk because the resources to attack are growing.
But also, in addition to that, the more we rely on these technologies, the more we take it for granted, and we just we lay down our cards. So if it's completely normal to use chats and talk to like an AI assistant, you're not going to think too much about it. You're just going to talk and share information, and that could be a bad actor as well. So we are at this interesting intersection where we rely, like how much do we rely on AI? And it's inevitable, right? We will rely a lot on it. So we will have to rethink security.
Right. So it's like trust. So what you said, it's the interesting time is the trust factor. So the more we become comfortable with AI helping us in our lives, the more vulnerable we become, which is just like personal relationships. The more you trust a person, the more that person can actually harm you. So this
Absolutely.
is a very interesting intersection, and we're pivoting in the world. And cybersecurity is at the forefront of it, and you guys have a lot of work.
We do have a lot of work ahead. I'll give you another example, like a personal example, right? I would search things. So I use Perplexity, right? I use Perplexity to search for information. So I'm doing research on a topic, and I would say, hey, Perplexity, can you find me documents that talk about this topic? And then it will list the documents, give me links, and it will also summarize what this topic about so that I make a decision if this is worth actually reading or not. Because that's another aspect, right? How much do we trust AI? So I tend to read everything, like manually read it. So that's a good thing. So the first time I used it, I clicked on every link and I verified every source. The second time I used it, I verified 80% of the sources. Third time I used it, I was like, maybe like it seems like it's okay. Like I'm not going to verify everything. So like
Trusting it more.
Yeah, you use it and you trust it. And then at some point, these things might blow up.
I feel the same thing happens with me when building or like programming something. But at the same time, I didn't get to a point where I trust it 100%. I can see where the complexity with vibe coding happens quickly, especially if you're building something from scratch. Like once you see multiple files, or maybe that's like the paranoia in me, but once you see these like files being built and now these scripts or this code is not working, I just get paranoid and I start like reverting and just finding checkpoints to actually. So from that perspective, I actually less trust it, believe it or not. I know the hobbyists are learning more and people who starting are getting to build things. But for someone who's been programming, this is becoming like of a relationship where it's less trust. And where it comes more, good example that you had about Perplexity, because Perplexity, I don't know if they have their own models yet or they're running foundation models from other companies. But the thing is, as we see with ChatGPT also on other ones, is that at some point that the quality of that model changes. So even if you trusted it like for the last 6 months, like 4.0, for example, for GPT, and then you get introduced with GPT-5, and it's like, this is not the same quality. So now you need to reset this trust cycle. It's like, do I trust you again? So I wonder how many people, how often people do this when new models get introduced in the arena, etc., because it's definitely something that affects your type of work and the quality.
That
Absolutely.
point,
That's a very interesting point. Sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
really quick, because I love the engineering take right there, Rabea. So you're saying the vibe coding. So yeah, vibe coding is like a sugar high. It's super powerful if you know what you're doing, but if you think it's going to be some silver bullet, it's not going to be. At some point, you're going to have to know what you're doing. So then I wonder, for the hackers, then, Ahmed, it would be probably this similar. In other words, vibe coding, if we call it, a person with no coding ability can produce some function fast. But then once, like Rabea is mentioning, the more you start to build out on top of that functionality, you hit a plateau, and eventually you just completely collapse, and you have something that is no longer usable because you don't know how to design, you don't know what you're looking at. So for the person who knows what they're doing, they can 20x themselves, 10x themselves. I'm throwing numbers, but you guys get the point. To the person that doesn't know what they're doing, they can spin up something quick, but that's about as far as they're going to go. So let's talk, now we translate that to hackers. So a hacker, maybe it's the case that simple vulnerabilities, simple technical attacks, like say like a DDoS attack, like we want to just spin up something that can create some kind of a brute force DDoS attack, or maybe a rainbow attack, some kind of, we have some kind of rainbow hash database, or those are like technically not super complicated, but if you don't know how to code, you wouldn't be able to get there. But maybe the vibe hacking can get you to maybe a DDoS attack, or maybe some kind of a rainbow password attack, or whatever they call them now. But you're not going to get maybe too much further than that. But that alone increases the amount of basic attacks that can come your way, which means those companies that might not be sort of in the bullseye of your activist hackers, maybe now they're going to be hit with more of these sort of basic attacks, which also creates problems. So I don't know if that's.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes perfect sense. And I can give you a little bit more details, actually. So think about if you want to run some sort of a hacking, like a sophisticated hacking attack, you would need different types of hackers with different skills. So you would need someone who knows how to write code so that they create the malware. You would need someone who understands the social aspects of your target so that they can create maybe phishing emails, right? They need to be understanding of like what that society looks like. What is it that people will click on, right? What is it that's going to grab the attention? You will also need people to interact with this malware once that malware is basically landed. And then depending on the different technologies that your target has, you will need people who understand these technologies very, very well. So what are these technologies? You have clouds, right? So very specific things. So if the target is using AWS, your attacker needs to understand AWS very well. Same thing with any vendor, any other. Same thing if you're using on-prem. And same thing if you're using some sort of an industrial control systems. And these are the systems that are being used for things such as nuclear reactors. It's a type of work, right? Back in the day, probably 2008, there was the first malware that was used against an actual physical facility. It was called Stuxnet. Look it up. Stuxnet was a malware that affected these industrial control systems, causing the centrifuges to spin faster than they should, and then they break. That was a big deal in the cybersecurity world because it was the first time that a physical attack happened as a result of a cybersecurity attack. But that took a lot of work on the people who created the malware, right? Because they needed to know specific information. You need less of that now because of AI. You can have one or two people who can do the work of teams, because you don't really have to be an expert on AWS. The AI is going to help you through that. You don't need to be an expert on assembly to write the best malware out there. The AI is going to take care of that. So it multiplies that effect that way. So yes, you're absolutely correct. It makes things much easier. If you know just a little bit, that is more enough for you to become such a great hacker at that time.
Yeah. And that trial and error cycle is so quick. That's another thing. Like, other than AI can provide you with whatever content needed to build a malware, for example, But the trial and error cycle is so quick. I can try, and if I fail, I keep like reiterating. So it's definitely like a risk that is growing for sure, especially when these AI models are improving. All right, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, which is uh, regarding open source. It's core to innovation. We know that for sure. Open source, especially from software perspective, and now with AI models also, just like Hugging Face as a platform and how much they're hosting, and a lot of people are using it. But it comes with its own security baggage, right? So, in your view, what is the trade-off here? Like, when does open source shine in cybersecurity, especially with the AI wave, and where does it introduce unique vulnerabilities?
That's a great point. I am an advocate for open source, right? I think open source is an important part of our industry, the same way it is important in the other industries, in the general tech industry. If you look at all of the big players out there, so you're talking about like, I don't know, Google and Meta and all of these companies, they really care about producing open source projects because they want to support the community. That's where a lot of the innovations come from. Have you guys used GitHub, right? Git is an open source project. And now it's the backbone of every code project that you have. On top of this open source project, Git was created in, was it 2005 or 2006, right? By Linus Torvalds. And then on top of that, a lot of businesses, not necessarily open source, were created. So GitHub and GitLab and so on, right? It's the same thing for AI. We have many open weights models out there. So we have the Llama models. We have OpenAI creating the GPT OSS now. And the reason why this is important is because it gives everyone who is not part of the industry yet, in a financial way, the opportunity to be introduced to this software. It kind of open up you don't have to be a rich person or a person who lives in a rich country to be able to use this technology. That's a big difference. So all of a sudden, you have access to billions of people, potential really good programmers and security professionals and so on, who otherwise would have limitations accessing the software if everything was paid, if there was nothing free. Because you have that, you have access to the talent, you develop this talent, and this talent will create projects that will also help the financial aspect. So Git as an example. And it's exactly the same thing with AI and LLMs. If you go to Hugging Face is the GitHub for AI, essentially, right? People create their own models, they train them, they create data sets, and they upload all of that into Hugging Face, and they share that with everyone. So now you can go on Hugging Face and you can use one of these models or data sets that is published there to create your own small application. So that is great. Now comes the security part of that. With that, and every time we say someone creates some sort of an open source thing and uploads it somewhere, and people use it, we should think about supply chain attacks. Because there is a trust element. I could create a model and I could upload it somewhere. And if people use it, then they have to trust me. Otherwise, it's going to be an issue. As a matter of fact, some of these models could have malware as part of them. There are, like, if you Google around, you will see many headlines about Hugging Face being, the term I believe was used, riddled with malicious models. So many people uploading malicious models, which led an organization such as Hugging Face to apply security as well. So they're scanning these models, they're making sure, like they're applying multiple controls on top of that. So just to kind of round it, I think open source is a backbone for technology in general, including cybersecurity.
So a good open source strategy for an enterprise. So you want to use a combination of the public private models and then the open source public models too in your strategy, so you can do things that are within your firewall, and then you can go over the wire, over the firewall if you need to access the frontier models, because that's the trade-off, is when you're using unless you're doing a specific task, you can get a smaller model to do a specific thing about as good as some of the top benchmark models. But what will be a good security open source strategy? I'm an enterprise and we want to do something internally. We don't want to go to any of the public closed models. We want to keep everything within our firewall. We want to use an open source model, Llama, maybe 70B or one of those models, and we want to We want to run something on top of that. So there could be something like what we want to do with legal paperwork or specific IP addresses. We want some kind of retrieval system where we want to make sure everything stays within our environment. We lose some of the horsepower of the frontier models, but our security is much better. So you're saying we could actually bring in problems from the open source too. So what might be some steps, a couple steps or some tips to an enterprise that wants to combine the public closed models with the open source models, of a couple tips to do, sort of check boxes to do if you're going to bring in something from Hugging Face.
So let me backtrack a little bit and just describe the problem that you're trying to solve. We have the commercial models. So let's say these are OpenAI, for example. And for some of our data is too sensitive. We do not want to share it with these organizations, OpenAI as an example. So the alternative solution is to build an in-house AI engine that maybe relies on one of these open weight models, maybe it relies on Llama, for example, or maybe even GPT OSS itself, but it's a local version that's running internally. There's no data sharing whatsoever.
Exactly.
So that's definitely the right approach. However, it's funny that you asked me this because I asked that question just yesterday as part of the SANS AI survey event. It was an event that we ran at SANS, and we basically asked security professionals a bunch of questions. And as part of the discussion, there was a panel discussion, and I asked that specific questions. What are the tips that you would give to someone who wants to build their own AI system internally for privacy reasons? And the answer I got was a little bit of a challenge. And the answer I got was, it's easy to build a POC, right? It's easy to download Olama and run a POC locally. But people underestimate the amount of resources you will need, the amount of GPUs and power that you will need to execute something like that. Because you will need a system that has, first of all, has good technology, so authentication, authorization, all of the security things that you need, but also good hardware. So you have to invest in this hardware ahead of time. That's an initial investment. And on top of that, that hardware you invested on might be obsolete in a few years from now, not even, maybe 6 months. And there might be a new model that came out, and it might not be the best for the hardware that you bought. So the short answer, it's easier, not as easy to implement as we think. So what's the alternative? Many people use cloud providers right at this point, right? And if you're using a cloud provider, you trust that cloud provider with your data. You're storing your data in their buckets and in their RDS and et cetera, right? You're already sharing pretty much everything with AWS, as an example. So does it make a difference to host your models within the AWS infrastructure if your data is already there? It's kind of the same thing. Unless they're using your data for training purposes, that would be different. That explains why all of these cloud service providers are pushing so much and investing so much in building AI-related services. So AWS is building Bedrock, AWS Bedrock, and that's a service that is designed to build agents and applications that are AI related. And within there, you can choose the type of models that you want to use, and AWS will host that model in a private way, right? They wouldn't use your data for training. There's like a consent agreement that you have to look into. But other than that, it seems like that would be the trade-off. Rely on the cloud providers. Now, obviously, again, it depends on how sensitive your data is. You could build your own solution. It's just like the sensitivity of your data and the importance of this data should match the investment that you have. And you need to understand ahead of time what that investment looks like.
Exactly. That's a good answer. It's great to hear that the security perspective for basically a business or engineering strategy. And that's exactly the question that many enterprises are facing. Many technology teams are going through this exact question of where should we host? It's going to be always going to be some kind of distribution of family of models. Sometimes it's going to be public closed. Sometimes it's going to be open source and more private. And then when you, like you said, when you get into the private model, what exactly do we mean by private, and what are the private trade-offs, like you mentioned? Yeah. So this is probably one of the most relevant topics going on right now in enterprises and technology departments, is precisely this. So it was a great insight there.
To build on top of the Well, open source and standards are being published. We know that like once LLMs came into the picture and people are using it, I'm imagining that mainly the world of tech looked at, especially like SaaS and all these like enterprise applications. Okay, so we have LLMs, people are using it. What's the best way for people to actually consume our services through it? And I think this is where Anthropic came with the MCP protocol. We're going to provide a standard of how to communicate, how to integrate your APIs and tools. So Ahmed, before we talk about the security side of things, do you mind like giving us an overview of MCP and why it came to existence?
Yeah, absolutely. So MCP, well, let's backtrack a little bit before MCP. If you are to create an agent, it's kind of, there is no standards, right? You create it however you like, you write your code however you like, and there might be distinctions between your tools that you use, that the agent uses, languages, it's all sorts of things. So there was no compatibility between anything you write and anything I write. Now,
Just I actually want to note on that because we had that experience. Like we built LLM applications before MCP came into the picture or any standard. And yes, like whether you use any framework or library in place, my application would look totally different than anybody or any thinking process of any other engineer. So it was really hectic to understand how people are going to build LLM applications.
yeah, absolutely. Even if we use the same frameworks, right? Even if we both use LangChain, our application architecture could look totally different. So like it was drastically different. So then Anthropic came in and then they said, all right, it seems like we need a protocol to manage communication between these different agents. Now, we obviously cannot control what people create and how they create it, but at least if there is a standard way for communication between these agents, then things will work. If you think about it, that's exactly what microservices are. Microservices communicate their smaller components. Each one of them is written in a completely different language in a completely different way, but the communication between them are based on APIs. So the MCP protocol does to agents, to AI agents, what the APIs do for the applications, provide a standardized way of communication. An interface. So what does that mean? Or what are the capabilities within MCP? MCP basically allows for one agent or a client. It's a client-server architecture. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but for the simplicity, it's a client-server application. So you have a client, and the client could communicate to one server or multiple servers, and these servers could have capabilities. We're going to call them tools. So these tools can connect to different, can perform different things. The tools are basically the arms and legs that you provide to the LLM, meaning that if you want an LLM to go and search the internet, that's a tool that searches the internet, right? If you want an LLM to access your Google Calendar, that's a tool that accesses your Google Calendar, and so on and so forth, right? And you can be creative with these tools. You package all of these tools in the form of one agent, an agent that manages your Google stuff, so calendar, email, etc. Right? That's your assistant, your personal assistant. That's one agent. Then someone else could create an agent that, for example, manages your Salesforce. So connects to Salesforce and then do whatever. Gets your information from there, uploads information, and so on. Now you have two different agents. You could have one client that communicates with both. That's what MCP does. So MCP will allow for communication between your client and the agents, will allow the client to discover what capabilities or tools those servers or agents had. So you can actually have Claude Desktop, which is a client, and you can configure it to communicate with these agents. And you can ask it, hey, what capabilities do you have? And because of the MCP protocol, it will be able to communicate with these different agents and say, hey, what capabilities do you have? What capabilities do you have? And what capabilities do you have? And it will collect all of them and will list them for you. So now the next step is for you to ask it for a certain task. So you would say something like, I don't know, do I have any meetings this evening? And it will know that agent number 2 or MCP server number 2 has the ability to go to your Google Calendar, and it will reach out to that agent, and that agent will do its job, response back using the MCP protocol. So you can see that it maximizes the how many agents you can work with. That also means that I can create an agent, publish it, and then you can use it.
Yeah, and that's like on me that from the beginning, the idea was that LLMs, we're just finding more and more that they are able to reason on what be a next step and define the action that it needs to do. And that's what brought up this whole idea of tool calling and getting out of your ecosystem as an LLM to grab and retrieve information. So yeah. So now we come to the big one. Right now, I'm telling you again, as an engineer, a friend of mine actually told me about Context 7, one of the apparently well-known MCP servers, just gives you documentation of all the tools that you're using on all the frameworks. It's just a direct way of conversating with documentation while you are coding. So you're not getting out of your IDE instead of like going to a link and going through all of that. It's just helping your agent, your IDE-driven agent, to actually build the right thing. So now you can see how this is open source, hosted in some random server that I don't know where it is. And it's an easy one-liner to add to any of your systems. It's just, here's my MCP, boom, now it's working. How much of risk surface are we expanding with introducing all these open source or hosted somewhere MCP servers that everybody's saying they're useful? You can read everywhere that how much people see the benefits of it, but how much of a risk are we exposing here?
We are exposing a tremendous amount of risk, as a matter of fact, on multiple levels, right? So one thing is that Context 7, as an example, could be a totally legitimate application. It also could be a malicious application. You don't know, right? Because you haven't vetted it. Now, this is an open source project, the specific one. So you can have the open source community to go through it and make sure that it is working. If there's a version of that that is hosted somewhere, then that is a little bit problematic, right? You probably want to host it yourself, or at least host it within a trusted party. So maybe one of your vendors that you work with will host it for you, as an example, right? This is not a problem that is unique to AI. It's a problem that has been with us for a long time, which is, again, the software supply chain. In this case, AI supply chain. So think about what could possibly go wrong with that. One, I could host a malicious server, and I could leak your information. I could steal your information. I could also provide you with false information. I could also cause certain actions to be taken depending on what you're using with the IDE. Remember that your IDE executes commands, right? As you're coding, the application could ask you something like, hey, do you want me to run your program? And it will give you an actual command like, I don't know, like Python run whatever, and you would say run. That could possibly mean that I could poison that IDE to run malicious commands as well. That could happen easily. So that's one thing. But then the other thing is that within that agent, within that MCP server itself, you could have different tools. Each one of them has a description, and this description could change. I could alter that, especially if it's an open source project, especially if it's a project that is hosted somewhere else. So we need more vetting on these open source projects, especially for changes that happen sudden. Someone could like introduce this description and then everyone's using it. It will take some time for it to be discovered if it was allowed to be merged as well. How do we defend against these? We defend against these the same way we defend against any type of artifact that we use externally. So think about the closest example I can give is the Docker images. Do you just go randomly on the internet and download Docker images and execute them, right? In an organization? Probably not. I see Rabea smiling. He's like, yeah, people do that.
I was just gonna comment that I guess for well-known images, you just have that default belief that it's good to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see your point. Yeah, you just don't go like downloading any Docker.
So like, how do you control that in an actual environment? Well, what you would do is that you would create a registry that is a trusted registry. This could be hosted locally to you. This could be AWS ECR. This could be GitHub, something that you control. And then you would prevent people, like you would create a policy and you would apply technical controls to apply this policy that prevents people from downloading this Docker image or any Docker image unless it was from a trusted source, right? If you need, so for example, you need, I don't know, some sort of a well-known image, you can actually copy it or copy a version of it into your own repo. That's one of the security recommendations that we usually have. The idea is create a trusted registry. And right now within the security community, there is this idea of do we have or how can we create trusted registries for MCP servers, for LLMs themselves, so that we have more control. So that we can say you're not allowed to use any model or any MCP server, except if it comes from this one place or few places that we trust or have controls over. This is still a discussion, right? So there isn't anything, any technical solutions, but that's what we are thinking about collectively as a cybersecurity industry.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that. And I know Docker images and introducing your own registry, whether it's on your enterprise cloud or whatever, is a way to go. But I think one of the examples where that doesn't work, and this is just like to see how much of a challenge it is something like NPM or pip, or like there's a lot of attempts that I saw where you can set up your own NPM registry just sitting as a proxy. It caches and you make sure you scan everything. And that failed. Like, I don't know if there's companies that used it, but I can see where it becomes a challenge. Anyway, like even from previous examples before AI.
NPM is more challenging than things like Docker images, right? Because of the volume, the number of packages, pretty much everything, right? So the wider it is, the more difficult it is going to be to control that. You're absolutely correct. Docker images are more challenging than OS images because just the volume. The smaller the package is, the more difficult it is to control it.
I had a question about MCP regarding, do you see the problem being a protocol issue or an access issue? And when I say that, is any MCP server that I'm gonna introduce, hopefully at some point there is a lot of methods in place to authenticate and authorize certain methods, for example. But where do you put that from access perspective or protocol perspective? Is that should I be able to look at the catalog of methods of an MCP server, and that should be my right as someone who wants to explore that kind of MCP server? Or am I blocking any access from the beginning? I'm just throwing thoughts, but you tell me what you think.
So let's dig into the history of MCP. And it's not a very long history. I think it was created a few months back. So version 1 did not have a lot of work on the authentication authorization side. So you can just open up the MCP server. It works. It's great, but it was designed to run locally. And by locally, you run it on your laptop, right? You basically have a client that execute commands, and then the commands would go into that MCP server. So authentication authorization soon became an issue once we started to put MCP server on the network side. So now we're using it as a network protocol. Version 2 of the MCP addressed many of these issues. So let me quickly point out what are the issues. There are two separate authentication authorization issues within MCP. One, the user needs to be able to authenticate to the MCP server itself. And then two, the MCP server needs to be able to authenticate to whatever services on the back end. So if you take the example we've given before, your Google Calendar, you need to authenticate to the MCP server. Then the MCP server needs to have some sort of a token that gives it access to your Google account. If you're using this in a personal capacity, it's not a big deal, right? You can get away with the way things are right now, which is there is no authentication between you, the user, and the MCP server. And there is one maybe single token that allows the MCP server to go to your Google Calendar.
Just deal with the tools.
Yeah. As long as you are one user, then there is no issue. Well, kind of, to some extent, right? But if you want to have that as an enterprise solution where multiple users are going to use this, you will need to worry about the first part, authenticating to the MCP server. And then also the MCP server needs to authenticate to multiple Google accounts. And they need to make sure that one user cannot access someone else's calendar. So how do you create that access control? As of now, version 2 is addressing some of the authentication authorization aspects. So it's a protocol issue, but it's quickly being fixed. So version 2.1 has support for OIDC and has support for OAuth. What that allows you to do is that, hey, you can connect an MCP server with some sort of an OAuth server and OIDC servers, which basically between the two of them will take care of authentication and authorization as well. So that part
For the
is
protocol,
for the
for the
protocol.
MCP.
Yeah, for the MCP server. So that part is being solved. There are still few issues as well, right? The other part where you need to control access has to be, it's not a protocol issue, it's more your application issue, because you have to write code that makes sure that you access it the right way. The easiest way to do that is to take the user's token and then pass it to the tool, right? And go to like Google, for example. That's not a great way to do it from a security perspective, because that means that your token, the user token, is going to leave your
Traveling.
system. And as soon as you travel, you make that travel, then that becomes a potential issue. So the MCP protocol itself is not perfect at this moment, but everyone is aware of these issues and they're actively working on enhancing it. And if you go to their documentation, you will clearly see like there are three different versions, 1, 2, and 2.1, and you will see the differences, and you will see that security and authentication authorization is at the forefront of what they are updating right now. So it will need a little bit of time. Keep in mind that this was created, in March 2025, I think. We should look it up, but yeah.
I think they released, something like they released the paper, something in November 2024 or something like that, and then the implementation after that. Yeah.
And if a company took their data strategy seriously, which many of them didn't, but MCP going obviously for tool calling but MCP then going into many different disparate data sources, different databases, different authentications for different databases. It needs to get, as you start to grow your multi-agent strategy, is more risky than if you had a central data fabric that was governed with a single source of access, where you could assign roles of who accesses and what accesses, which is a mature data strategy. You should have a centralized data fabric. You can call it a lake house or a warehouse, or it could be virtualized data layer, some semantic data model. It's centralized, it's governed from a central access point that has roles around who can access what, and then MCP on top of this now at least provides a little bit more security. So you're not trying to connect to 25 different databases in the company because you're trying to do all these different things. You have the single access data point. So in other words, a strong data strategy is very complementary to an MCP strategy in terms of all of the business outcomes, but also security, I would argue.
Absolutely.
I agree with you. That's also needed, because it brings me up to a small question, which is LLMs depend heavily on context. That's where you get most of the value. So without that data strategy in place,
Right, they're going to
becomes
many different databases. They're like, okay, we gotta go here, we gotta go here, we gotta go here, and it's just more access points. It's more things to manage. It's more roles around agents to manage. Where if you have the data strategy in place and a strong data governance, it doesn't eliminate risk, of course, but in other words, it helps reduce the risk and makes the MCP strategy even more viable. Your data strategy and your security strategy and your engineering strategy all need to be aligned on the multi-agent, because there's so many ways that this can go wrong in terms of business objectives and security risk.
So that's the part of my job that I like the most, is to research all of these new technologies and to try to think like, hey, what security risk could come out of that? The outcome of this research is always going to be, hey, the different CISOs and different technical folks as well are going to ask these questions, right? So this helps the discussion. The class that I wrote for SANS, SIG 545, talks exactly about that. It's a class about AI security and talks about the applications. So this is where a lot of this research comes from. And one challenge that I personally face is that the technology changes so fast. So there is a group of us who are doing research to basically create content that is useful. And we can already see that some of the things that we do right now, some of the things that we write are going to be obsolete very, very quickly. So even for us, like, we're having difficult time to keep pace, but we have AI tools. So Perplexity is a great tool to allow me to do research fast. I would highly recommend using something like that for any topic that you want to research. Just make sure you read the actual document.
I actually have, because I know it's been a definition of a risk, the whole idea of prompt injection. Now context engineering is in the picture. Just the idea that It's not all about prompts. It's all about what do you feed your AI? Are you feeding it the right context in place to get the most out of it? So is there something coming up like context injection or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if the term context injection is the one that's being used, but it's definitely part of the security issues. So think about it this way. Any input point, so like you have the LLM at the heart of the application, and there are many entry points to that LLM. One of them is your chat. It's a chat app, and the user is sending questions directly, and these questions through the interface go to the LLM, right? So that's one thing. But if you think about it, and that could lead to prompt injections, for example. But if you think about it, this is not different from any other data points. So what are the other data points, right? Your agent is going to your Google Calendar fetching information. That's an entry point because that information is going to go to the LLM. There's another agent that goes into a vector database and pull information from that. That's another entry point, right? So prompt injection could happen there. You have an agent that searches the internet for specific data, and there is some sort of a comment section in that data. Someone could use that to inject commands as well. The easiest way to think about it is if you have an application that has multiple components, some of them are LLM components, you would look into all of these entry points and you would apply guardrails on that to protect against prompt injections, regardless if this is coming from a vector database or someone is typing it, whatever it can be.
I was just going to add to the multi-agent, like you mentioned, the designs themselves basically reveal new exploits. So just through the design itself of how you put together your multi-agent, you have different vulnerabilities emerging from different design patterns specific, which is new. This is a new problem.
I had a question more on, we know that there is other protocols that don't serve the direct same purpose of MCP. MCP is heavily focused on how do we utilize tooling for agents in general. But what about other protocols? Where do you see them going? Are they evolving? Are they becoming more popular? Like I know MCP, like a lot of people are using because it makes sense at the beginning. Once you read multi-context protocols, what is this? But then just 5 minutes into it, I totally get this. If you've been using even anything, something ChatGPT or Claude, you can see that's what I want. Just more power for this model to help me more. But for other protocols, every big tech company is trying to say, I know how agents are going to communicate at some point. So just more of an opinion question, but where do you think it's going?
So as with every other or previous protocols that were created, you will see some of them addressing some areas and they become the most popular. MCP is that protocol that we have. We do have others. So we have agent to agent, A2, right? Which basically facilitates the communication between agents. That's what it does. There's also another one that's called Agent Communication Protocol, ACP. And they also explain like how these standardized rules set to enable autonomous discovery and interact. So they do some of what MCP does, but there are differences, and they're trying to basically build on top of each other, right? I don't know what will be the protocol that we are going to be using next. That is going to remain. It might not be even MCP itself, but so far it seems like MCP is the dominant protocol that we have right now. Other protocols are still trying to do other things around it, but not to the same. They're not as popular, if you will.
Yeah. I think, and we brought this subject, me and Ryan, before, but the concept of an AI organization, I think this, Ryan brought this up multiple times. I like the concept because when you work with a team, and even if you have your own team, mostly delegating a task, the work on this task is going to be not connected to you as a manager or a supervisor. The work is going to happen somewhere else, and you're just looking for the outcome. And that, I believe, justifies that communication to be more event driven, where I just hand off the work and someone else is going to be delegated, some other agent is going to be delegated the work, get it done, and send me another event that I can say as a supervisor, this is good. This is what I need to continue my task on my side. But I see your point also. I think some protocols are going to complement each other. Some protocols are going to compete to see who's going to be more popular and more worked on. It's actually very interesting. They mentioned Claude has that 2.1. I have to check it out. I didn't. Yeah. So it's a matter of like which one evolves faster. AI agents are fascinating because that's how close they are to us and how we do things. So it's easier to see it, but yeah, like when once anybody can think about it, they can conceptualize it quickly once you get MCP into the picture and tooling and calling tools. So it's like, okay, this is an employee or this is like a team member. So why not use the same communication ways that we do with everyday?
That is pretty
It's
cool.
all
If you think about the ACP, so the ACP, I think the ACP uses REST APIs in the backend, right? Which is different than what MCP and A2A uses, right? Which is they use JSON RCP, which from a design perspective, I don't know if JSON files is the best way to do it. I know that MCP relies on JSON RCP because they used to be like an desktop application type of things. Information using that method. To me, like I'm not an expert on this, to me it makes more sense to use something like REST API, which is like very well documented. So it seems like ACP is doing this better. I could be wrong on that.
I am I'm not an expert either on RCP services, but I know they're much lighter because of the nature of how they transmit the data. And the other thing, I think there's a lot of tooling where you can turn into a REST API, boom, now it's an RCP service and you can just run with it. So I think there's maybe that aspect, but I see your point. I have to research that too from my side. I had a question, just going back to now we have all these like security tools. Everybody's scanning and looking and monitoring and seeing where the red flag is, etc. And now you have AI chips that are just generating content at like, I don't know, 400, 500 tokens a second. It's a lot of data. So how are security teams or these tools are going to handle this amount of data that is coming in? Because I don't know, like I wish I can find a visual of how much the impact is of all this generated content from AI models, but I think it would be a huge challenge already for the amount that is coming in.
So usually security teams, let me make sure I understand the question. So you're talking about security teams scanning the data. Security teams, they very rarely scan all of your data in your organization, right? What they
All the
do,
tools.
yeah, but the tools themselves, they don't scan all of your data looking for security alerts, right? Or hunting for threats. What they do is that they take a subset of that data. And what that subset is, two major types of data. One, the actions that were taken. These are the event logs. All of your applications are producing logs. So that's a major part of what security teams would look at. The logs being produced by applications, infrastructure components that you have in your organization. So someone used the VPN to log into your organization. That's a log. The other thing that security team looked at is the state of the infrastructure that you have. So what did you deploy? So you have a firewall, you have an EC2 instance, you have a server, a Linux server that runs a specific type of software. These are the two major categories that security teams would look at. The reason for that is because they want to know how does your infrastructure look like. So you have a package that is insecure. We want to be able to know that. And we also want to be able to know what actions were taken, where did you log in from, what commands did you execute on these systems. So that by itself is a huge volume of data. It's a subset of the overall data that's being produced by an organization, but it's still a significant subset. And historically, this has given us a challenge. How do you collect this data? But then more importantly, how do you store or where do you store it? And it costs a lot of money to store this data. So we had to prioritize. And we never had the ability to go and look at all of this data at the same time. So we would use different types of techniques. So one of them is that we know what we are looking for. We're going to filter for everyone who logs into the VPN or anything, right? And we're going to extract that and create some rules, very static type of rules around that. So for example, we're going to say if Rabea logs in from Florida to the VPN, but then at the same time, Rabea logs into his email from Russia, that's a flag. That's what we call an improper login. So that's a very static rule, right? And that is easier to apply. That's why we apply it, because it's easier to apply. And then we started to elevate our work and we started using machine learning. So machine learning would read this data, so the logs and the infrastructure configuration, if you will. It will help us to identify anomalies, because one thing that machine learning is really good at, so we're not talking about LLMs, we're still talking about basic machine learners as all of these tools have it. They would create benchmarks, and they would say something like, Rabea logs in every day at 9 a.m., right? And then at this point, they logged in at 2 a.m. from a different IP address. That's an anomaly. That is different from what we are used to see over the past 3 months. So we would use machine learning to flag these anomalies. All of the vendors have that. So that's really good. The problem with that is that it produced a significant amount of false positives. All sorts of kinds of false positives. So you traveled, right? You went back to Jordan and you logged in. That's an anomaly. So now that it's a problem. Now comes in the new wave, Gen AI and LLMs. And we don't have a lot of solutions yet, but as I said earlier, there is some 30 plus startups at this point and other organizations that are integrating LLMs into this process of monitoring these different logs. And that will allow us to do many, many things. Well, it's going to help us to detect anomalies in a much better way, because there is some level of understanding of the context. But then two, we will also be able to run investigations. So not only we will flag and say, Rabea logged in from a different country, but we will also be able to correlate that information with other things. So if you are a person, an analyst, and you see this, what's your next step? You're going to maybe look at other things that you accessed. Maybe you're going to call that employee. I'm going to call Rabea and say, hey, are you traveling, right? That's the analyst's job. AI can do that. So it will take it furthermore to investigate and create more questions, study the case, and then produce a report that says, yeah, this is an issue, or no, Rabea is just on vacation. So that's basically what we are doing, and that's the pitch that you're going to hear from many of the new vendors that are coming up.
And is the idea to, well, I'm sure it's productivity, but in other words, for the analyst to focus on the most important incidents that they need to be intervening, instead of like focusing, let's say, on 10, 15 incidents a month, just giving an example. It's only the 2 and 3, and the LLM is going to handle the rest. Is that the idea?
So we hope that it will get to that point, but that's not the only benefit, right? Because think about the analyst also needs to have skills. So just like the attackers needed to have multiple skills and the LLMs help them with that, the analyst is the same story. You also need to learn skills on how to use these tools, what type of attacks are there, how to look for them. And the LLMs can be a great asset in that, because you don't need to craft. So like think about these systems that collect this data. We call them SIEM tools, right? SIEM. We put all this data in there. You will have to create queries, technical queries, like in a specific language, so that you can query the data. You don't have to learn that anymore, because the LLMs are going to produce that for you. So that's one small aspect of it. And then the LLMs are going to produce more questions and go through the investigation. You will see results very quickly. So efficiency is great. It will also help educate the analyst, because no analyst knows everything, right? And as they go through this process, they will learn more and more about it. And then you will effectively be able to do, with 3 people, you will be able to do the job of like 20 or 25 people. Having a conversation yesterday, and we often hear something like, hey, few jobs are going to be eliminated, but then more jobs are going to be created in ways that we didn't think about them before, right? So the example of that, like when we switched from horses to cars, everyone who works with horses, you almost do not have a job. We still have like, I don't know, 5%, maybe less of these people in there, because recreational purposes, people still use horses. But largely, people don't need their services anymore. But now we have mechanics, car mechanics, like an entirely new class of jobs. With AI, it's the same thing. We don't know all of the jobs that are going to be created. We don't have we can't imagine all of it yet, but we have an idea. So in the example that I gave you before, one of the things that will happen is that these 3 analysts that now have a little bit more time, instead of spending their times looking through logs and looking through alerts trying to make a decision, their job could become more can I vet or make my LLM better or faster? So I'm going to look into what the LLM did and think about ways to make it better, enhance it. So working with the LLM. So it's a different type of job than what they previously had to do.
You actually brought up a great point, which is analysts are going to have the time to actually add value to these tools that they use, just like LLMs. And that gets me back to analysts are coming from this whole security sector, but they're not engineers. Like they're not software engineers. So how much you need to invest time in how to build software, tweak software, improve software to become a better security analyst or a security engineer.
That's a great
and
point.
I'm not trying to offend people because I know there is a lot of people that love software and they do it and they do security. I'm just saying, I think the majority of what I saw from security analysts in the enterprise.
Now, that's a great point. And have you guys, there's a very popular book, like a small book called Who Moved My Cheese? Pretty sure many of our audience heard about it, where what that means, the gist of it is that you have to be always ready. You have to always be able to adapt to change because change is inevitable. And it's not comfortable to always be on your toes, right? Be ready for change. All of us tend to revert back into our comfort zone. And I think that's something we need to fight, right? We need to be able to adapt. And that is
especially in tech.
And that is very, very obvious in fast-moving tech, such as AI. The example that was given before about the people who work with horses, feeding them, taking care of them, and the mechanics is a good example. You will need new skills to be able to live in the new world. Your job is probably going to be find the skills that are relevant the most. So if you are an analyst, my recommendation would be being an analyst is a great career. It requires a lot of technical knowledge, and later on, as you progress, more high-level knowledge, managerial knowledge, etc. But you have to combine that with AI/engineering knowledge as well. The engineering part is not only because of AI. It actually was a problem before AI, because we used to have what we call the SOAR solutions, which is basically our way of saying we need to automate things using traditional code. That was a challenge, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago, because many of the analysts are not engineers by trade. And now we are asking them to write code to automate their work. So we would hire developers, and the developers are not security analysts. So now you have two groups. And the best person to automate the analyst's job is an analyst who knows engineering or an engineer who knows the analyst's work. So this cross-functionality was needed. Those people who had this cross-functionality were able to get really good jobs. So now it's the same story with AI. As an analyst, you have to be able to learn a little bit of code, right? That's always helpful. That's, by the way, my recommendation to anyone in the industry, anyone in the security industry, learn a little bit of code. You have to know, because that's a topic that gets discussed a little bit. It should be discussed a little bit more. But aside from that, learn AI as well, because you will have to use these tools. You don't have to be an expert. There are expert engineers who created or are creating these tools for you, and they will give you the ability to make tweaks, right? So you don't have to be an expert, but you have to have some level of knowledge.
It's like when you maintain your own car. If you know the skills to maintain your own car, you don't need to be a mechanic. You just need to know how to do basic maintenance.
Yeah, like change the tire, change the oil, right? You have to be able to, it's not like you're going to need it all the time, but there are situations where you're going to be more effective if you know how to change a flat tire.
And an enterprise setting, even if we go back to the DevSecOps side of it, is just removes a lot of the friction once you integrate security tools into your pipelines, etc. So I totally agree. And I agree that it's not being talked about a lot.
And again, back to the basics, right? The job of a security professional is to understand the technologies so that you can secure them. If you do not understand AI, how can you look at your logs and say, oh, this seems to be malicious? I'll tell you something else. So one of the problems that security folks face is the language and terminology. So sometimes when there is a new technology, usually new terminology would come with that. So we talked about many things, MCP servers, right? Agents, LLMs, all of these vector databases. All of these technical things, if you don't understand them as a security professional, and you go and talk to the engineer team, asking them to deploy security measures, they're probably not going to take you seriously. And that's also an advice for a recommendation for the security folks out there. You have to understand the technology. And the deeper you go, the better, but you don't have to be an expert on it, but you have to understand. You have to be able to speak about it and not make mistakes that are very, very obvious. A very good example of that is a security person going to a DevOps person and telling them, or a cloud engineer, and telling them, give me what server was running on this IP address, or give me the server name that runs this IP address. That's a typical thing to do in a security world, because historically, we used to tie the IP address with the name of the server. Use that as a unique identifier, which is absolutely not the case in a cloud context, right? These resources are ephemeral. IP addresses do not mean anything.
I have 2 quick comments, then a quick question. I love the machine learning example you brought up with the false positive and Rabea going to Jordan and it flags him as a false positive and you get overwhelmed with false positives. Probably by design, because it's going to be less costly to investigate a false positive than if you miss a vulnerability threat. So that's a machine learning trade-off, type 1, type 2 error trade-offs. They call it precision recall. So it's probably by design that the machine learning algorithm is creating more false positives because it doesn't want to miss any threats. So the cost of investigating the false positive outweighs the potential threat. And then you mentioned the LLMs. Perfect. So what the LLMs can do then is help add context to all of those flags, and then you're reducing your false positives. So what's probably not talked about much is how the machine learning is complementing transformer technology, either complementary or as an engine that's sitting underneath the LLM. This is a perfect example of what I would imagine a lot of vendors are going to be doing is they're going to be using these machine learning algorithms with transformer technology together. So in other words, like how they would complement each other. Like the transformer could go in and look at all those flagged potential threats, and with its context, take your false positive that maybe is very large, and then reduce it. So it's a sort of combination of these 2 techniques. You don't hear much about this. We only talk about Gen AI, but the machine learning is very much driving many of these things complementarily or as an engine underneath it. And the other comment is when you said the security people learning code. I would say also the engineers. So you hear a lot of this like, oh, generative AI is going to disrupt engineering, and they're saying that probably this is pop culture sort of. There's not really. I don't know how much data is to support this, but they're saying junior engineers are going to be the most affected by the generative AI because your seniors, you need your seniors and your staffs to. So maybe like to flip what you're saying is that people that are junior engineers that do know how to code and they're worried about software development roles changing, maybe they should learn cybersecurity and sort of like take their coding ability to cyber, because I believe cyber is growing. It's one of the top growing parts of tech. So like a junior engineer who's worried that generative AI might reduce the need for their technique, and that's debatable. But maybe what I would do if I was a junior engineer, I might start saying, okay, I can code pretty good. Let me go move and learn cyber, especially as you're saying, it's not talked about much and how valuable it is. Now my quick question. This goes all the way back to sort of tactics and strategy in the enterprise. So we have the concepts of distributed product teams. This is sort of for my own. I want to hear your input because this is some of the strategies that we've done. Is that you distribute product teams for the purpose of your product team is focused on a particular objective, and that team is going to have everybody it needs, like an end-to-end full stack team. It's going to have its software engineer, its data engineer, maybe a business analyst, maybe a data analyst, whatever you need to complete the objective end to end. But what it doesn't have is a security role. So there's 2 ways that I thought about this, and I'd love your opinion. One is you take your center of excellence security team, and then you just like you're distributing your data engineer or you're distributing a software engineer for that end-to-end team, tiger teams, you call it, Rabea. Do we distribute? Is it make sense to remove the one bottleneck left with the end-to-end team, which would be security? That would have to go back to the center of excellence to distribute a security person on the end-to-end team for that product? Or this was what I was back and forth on. Or do you take someone on that product team and train them where you can elevate their role for a specific purpose and then de-elevate the role? What are your thoughts on sort of this strategy?
So there are many people who have been trying to solve this issue. And I think the most common solution that I see is what we call the security champion. So the security champion is someone on these teams, like one person or two from each of these teams, that will join some sort of a security committee. They will get security training, right? To apply, so security training meaning security concepts. So we mentioned defense in depth before, right? So what is that? We talk about authorization and authentication. What is that? We talk about security standards and CVEs. So all of these are like technical knowledge that is very basic for a security professional, but we take this information and we allow the security champion to take this training. So these are security concepts that are being applied on whatever you do, network engineering, software development, whatever, right? And you apply these, and now you have a security champion or someone who understands security very well embedded within each one of these teams. So it becomes part of the security team's job to train, elevate, enable the different security champions everywhere. They would also have regular communications, weekly or monthly or something like that, right? And they would go through latest security trends, latest changes, latest news within the organization, what is happening from a security perspective. And they will relay that information to their own teams as well. Hey, by the way, there's this new vulnerability that's happened, log4j, right? We as a team, as a small team, we probably need to look into our code and make sure that this doesn't affect us. So that's what I've seen.
So the champion is mainly a software engineer or on the team?
Yeah, already on the team. Someone who's interested in security, right? Because you will always find a developer who's interested in security, who maybe has written certain security tools or worked with them before. You can identify these people easily, and then you basically elevate their skills, but most importantly, open up channels of communication. So now you know, as a security team, you know that there is one person on that team that you can reach out to. You have worked with them, you have met them in person, preferably, and you have workshops with them, so you have a relationship. So you can go quickly to that team and find information or give them information. Find information, meaning you have an investigation, you need help from them, or give them information, meaning you have information, there's a new security alert, and you want to relay that information to them. So that's a communication channel between them. It's also the other way around. They have a new project, they have some sort of a thing that they're working on. They would ask the security champion, hey, what do you think? Is there anything we need to worry about? And if that person knows the answer, they would answer it right away. Otherwise, that person will know people on the security team through that channel that they can reach out to. They can reach out, say, hey, we're working on this project. What do you guys think?
Well, I love this security champion embedded on your end-to-end teams with the governance council. Fantastic. I love this solution. I'm always trying to come up with ways, because distributing is powerful. You distribute teams end to end, you can move very fast, but then there's trade-offs. Then you lose some brand consistency and you lose some governance. So it's always trying to come up with ways of how do we maintain our central governance and then also be able to distribute on top of that. Security was one of the gaps that wasn't clear to me of what would be the best approach. So it was a great insight.
Sometimes it's not justifiable to have a security person in each one of these teams. Right. This is where the champion comes from. I was having a conversation a couple of weeks ago with someone who's an AI engineer. And he was saying, basically, I work on the security team. And I was like, can you elaborate more? And he said, we have a team of 5 and 4 of us are security professionals. And I am the AI engineers. And they hired me because they need someone who understands AI as part of that security team, which is a great idea, right?
Yeah, it's a champion on reverse. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I actually love, from this concept, the communication side of things, because I think security teams in general, not on purpose, just because they're just trying to protect an enterprise. So usually, sometimes it's not the highest priority to communicate changes that has to happen. So the champion concept is pretty cool to actually just, again, smoothen that friction that happens between engineering teams or the enterprise overall.
We call it the silo. The cybersecurity teams are usually living in a silo, and that is in the communication way, right? But also in the physical way. Have you guys worked in organizations where the cybersecurity team live inside a closed room where nobody has access to that room, right? But that physical barrier actually becomes an actual mental barrier as well. We didn't know. We see these people going into this room and we know their faces, but like we don't know what they do. Walking, like I was always part of the security teams, right? So I often find myself walking in one of their organizations and someone says, "Oh, you're a security person. Like we know your face. What do you do?" I'm like, nobody knows what you do. Yeah, which is we're trying to break that with one of the ways we try to break that is by having champions everywhere.
And I have this thing I wanted to just like, it's just like a quick like paragraph, like it's like a message to non-security people. Be kind to your security people. Imagine arrows are raining down in your house every minute. Then imagine someone spends all their time patching up the damage and reinforcing the house to protect everyone against the never-ending onslaught of arrows. Now imagine you don't even know any of this is happening. You sleep like a baby. However, the person protecting the house sleeps knowing the arrows never stop. And now imagine you don't even know this person exists. You never invite them to parties. That's your security team. Invite them to your parties.
Invite them to your teams are going to isolate themselves. It's kind of their fault.
Right. But that's how I think people, and so we're talking about tech people. Tech people know security guys. Like we know they exist, but sometimes not really. Like you mentioned, I'm at the situations where but like most of the enterprise doesn't even know these people exist or the work they're doing or what they so it's like that was sort of like the message. I thought it was funny.
Oh, we're gonna keep it as is, man. Well, that was a cool one, Ryan. We're gonna keep it, man. We're just gonna make it like a little short too. I have the rapid fire round. I think this is gonna be fun. Rapid fire round. Question number 1: if you could hack into any system in history just to peek under the hood, no consequences, which one would you choose?
In history?
In history.
So in history, I think I would be very, very interested to peek underneath what governments know about us. I think that's what I'm really curious about. There is a movie. I forgot the name of the movie. I'll look up the movie. It was a movie about Berlin under the Soviet Union control. And it was a movie about spies and how spies are basically spying on everyone. And at the end of the movie, the Berlin Wall falls, and then everyone can actually see what intelligence agencies wrote about them. That's what I would like to know. See in this movie where you go into this room, so they open this information, and you go and you physically locate your file. You sit on a table and you open your file, and you start to see what they wrote about you. Was it called The Others? You know what? Let me look it up. I think this is it called The Others? Maybe you should ask ChatGPT. I think it's this one, The Lives of the Others.
More dangerous in 2025, malware or misinformation?
Oof, it's a tricky one. You have to think about that.
Take your time.
Man, I think from that will require a lot of imagination. I think on the when we think about cybersecurity, we often limit ourselves to the corporate world or the government agencies or like what we're trying to protect, right? From that perspective, malware is more dangerous because it directly affects these entities because we're trying to protect like a subset of the society. But if you think about it globally, a little bit more globally, so I think about the society as a whole, then misinformation is no doubt more dangerous than actual malware. So it depends on what you're trying to protect or the level at which you're at.
What's the most ridiculous password you've ever seen someone use? You can publicly say, I guess, like we can shame publicly.
I can look it up, actually. Hold on. I'm not going to shame anyone, though. Got it. Okay. So here is the most ridiculous username and password that I have ever seen. So there's an employee, and he used the first 3 letters of his actual first name as both the username and the password.
The first 3 letters? That's funny. All right. So if open source AI was a superhero, would it be Batman, Vigilante, or Joker, Chaos Agent? AI open source.
I'm leaning towards Batman because I have faith in humanity.
I agree. One cybersecurity myth you wish people would stop believing it right now.
That cybersecurity is its own independent discipline. Because you cannot secure what you don't understand, right? A cybersecurity discipline means, or a cybersecurity professional means someone understands technology, the technology that they're trying to secure, not someone who doesn't understand that technology and just like operates on a higher level.
Totally agree. In your view, who's doing more damage today? Script kiddies or careless executives? Is it the hobbyists or is it the executives that are making the most damage?
Like, it depends on how, I don't want to insult the executives. I think the careless executives, because they make it easier for attackers to run, like very basic attacks that should not work.
That's fair. You mean from the decision-making perspective of opening up risks?
From the
or-
decision-making perspective, yes, because there are things that you can control and there are things that you cannot control. You cannot control script keys. You can control executive decisions.
I agree 100%. What's scarier to you? A nation-state cyber attack or a rogue AI prompt injection spreading like wildfire?
I think nation state, because nation states, they have more power and that's a political answer, right? It's you need to, nation state doesn't only mean adversarial nations. It means any nation state actor. They have so many resources.
Too much power. I agree. If AI could be your personal security sidekick, what would you name it?
I would,
I'm sure you have a sidekick
I
right
do,
now,
and
right?
it's called HackerBot.
Like a HackerBot. So what do you feed HackerBot? Like, is it mainly papers, research?
It's basically a tool that's learning how to use different tools and different security tools, like a scanner, like Nmap scanner, for example, and like a Metasploit and things like, cloud knowledge and so on. So, hey, like scan this IP for me, and it will do that.
I had a question about voice in general. How is there any research or anything that you looked up before regarding like I don't know, hacking through voice AI or what kind of vulnerabilities that gets introduced with voice AI become because you mentioned like the interface is disappearing slowly, where between the task and the user, now this interface is disappearing, which is great from experience perspective. So now I can talk and that AI can do whatever I need it to do and come back to me. But how does that introduce vulnerabilities? If you saw anything like new
I
regarding
didn't
that
spend a lot
space.
of time purposely researching this, but I did see many examples of people using AI to imitate voices. Most of the examples I've seen were people trying to run some pranks on their friends and so on. But you can easily see how this can affect banking, for example. So there aren't many banks that use your voice fingerprint for authentication right now. That was circulating. And I think that idea is dead at this point. I don't think anyone's going to do that and rely on that actual, because like authentication, you basically authenticate with something you have, something you know, or something you are. Right? These are like the three major things. Something you are, that's biometric. Voice is one example. The something you are part is definitely going to be affected by all of this AI technologies. The something you have, that would be your token, your Google Authenticator, like that's something you have. That is still relevant because it's a device that you have, or like maybe like something you wrote down, like something you actually physically have, which is a little bit easier to protect. Same thing with the something you know, that's the passwords, for example. Because, I mean, 10 years ago or so, the something you are was the go-to, right? That was like the thing because it's like the easier. I think that's a major shift in mentality that we are going to see. We're going to rely less on the something you are part. That's for like the multi-factor authentication. When you say multi-factor, that's what it means, like combining two or more of these different methods. So if your password gets stolen, you still have that token.
I don't have any questions on my side, Ahmed. This was like very enjoyable conversation, man. That was
Yeah.
We covered a lot of
Yeah,
real
thank you
stuff.
guys. This was really fun.
Hopefully it was relaxing too. Like we want
Yeah,
it to be a conversation more than
just a
just like
casual.
hit back
It's
and
just a
forth.
casual conversation. I think this is
I
fun.
feel like we learned a lot. Like we got a lot of good insights from the security perspective, which is often not
Definitely.
perspective that's out there primarily in the AI hype world. Is the security perspective, so it's important.
And not a lot of security people are willing to, well, or not a lot of people are talkative and sharing information, you know? most security
reserved.
people are protective of what they know.
Yeah,
Yeah. So definitely it's small circles that you need to be in to learn more.
more on the nerdy side. I think that is changing. I think with social media effect. I remember back in college, there was a group called the Jordan Linux User Group. I don't know if you remember those guys or ever were part of it. So one of the major issues that they had is that it was very, very difficult for anyone to effectively join the group. You can go and join the group, right? If you join the group, you will receive the mailing list, etc. But if you ask a question, most likely the answer is going to be read the RTF, essentially, read the fucking manual. And that is not a great culture for encouraging people to come and join, because if you're going to shut people down when they're asking questions, especially younger ones, they're not going to learn anything.
They're going to find
and they're going to find some other community that is less elitist, if you will, and more welcoming. Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the major issues. And I think that experience has taught me that you need to be open. You need to be welcoming to others.
No, and I appreciate that. I wanted to ask you about your course, where the idea came from when AI, of course, like had a big impact of like making such a course. But what kind or type of roles that you say, if they join my course, they're going to take the maximum amount of value out of it?
So the idea of the class came in because I was doing AI research before the class. And I was already teaching for SANS, right? I was teaching a class called SIG 540, which is all about DevOps, DevSecOps, and automation and cloud. And I was doing research on AI on the side, working on HackerBot and learning like things and how does this work, right? How can we use it? But also like, hey, are there any security issues? And within the SANS community, we share ideas. So we always, every time someone like does some sort of research or comes across a research, we would share it with others and we would have comments and so on. So I would do that. And then our curriculum lead, Frank Kim, is the cloud and leadership curriculum lead. He reached out and he was like, hey, I think we need to create a class on AI. What do you think about creating one? I was like, I'm halfway there already. So like, let's do this. So that's how the idea came up. We did see a need. And again, because back to the basic concept, right? You cannot secure what you don't understand. We have to understand the technology first. And that was the level where I was at. I was trying to understand the technology and like asking AI engineers and like learning from them. And that's what I try to reflect in the class, basically covering what is AI, how does it work, all of the terminology, and then on top of that, how to secure it. So the best people to actually join this class or take the maximum of it are technical folks who wants to understand AI and the risks associated with it. So these are people who are going to be working in organizations with team members. Some of them might be AI researchers and application developers who are creating applications. And they have to advise and have something to say on security. How do you secure them? It also applies to people who are buying security solutions and implementing them. So the security team needs to have the understanding of the different technologies, how they work.
So I actually like when I did the alpha version of your class, and I think it was very interesting in many aspects. Other than the technical side of things, I think the high level concepts is something worth leaders also and organizations to explore and understand, because these threats are spreading. So, but yeah, thank you for this overview. Do you want to add something about Cyber Dojo, by the way, Ahmed?
So Cyber Dojo is a research institution, the research organization at this point, right? And what we do is that we're trying to create tools that are security tools that are AI based. HackerBot being an example of that. So HackerBot is a project that we are working on the back end. We will release it soon, so it will be an open source project. It is already there in my personal repo, but we have took it and we're adding a little bit more to it. If you need any help with anything AI security related, feel free to reach out to Cyber Dojo. We would be more than happy to talk to you and see if we can help with anything related to cybersecurity and AI. I want to also share with you a link that I referenced a lot in this talk, which is the Anthropic Threat Report. Well, this was really fun.
I was just going to say the same thing, man. It was really fun actually talking to you. It's a conversation. It was very informative. And at the same time, if you ever feel like there's a concept subject that you want to talk about, we're curious people too. I
Yeah,
love to learn.
absolutely.
So
I agree. The security threat is ongoing, evolving, like you mentioned. It's constantly changing. It's being reinvented. So, like, continuing the conversation.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you guys.
but other than that, thank you so
Yeah,
much, Ahmed.
absolutely.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Have a good one.
For Rabea Innovations.